The sun dipped behind the jagged peaks of the Appalachian Mountains as 4 hikers, Jake, Laura, Ben, and Kelly, followed a narrow trail through the dense forest. The wind grew colder, carrying a strange, musty scent. The map said the campground was only a mile away, but an unsettling fog crept between the trees, swallowing the trail behind them. Jake, the most experienced hiker, tried to shake off his nerves, but something about the fog felt wrong. The forest, once familiar and inviting, now felt foreign. The towering trees seemed to lean closer as if listening. Each breath grew heavier as the mist thickened. Jake glanced back, but the path behind them was gone, swallowed by the creeping fog. "We should have reached camp by now," he muttered under his breath, but no one answered. The silence felt as heavy as the air around them. "It wasn't supposed to rain today," Laura whispered, her voice trembling. The fog thickened, curling around their legs like ghostly fingers. Ben laughed nervously. "Relax, it's just mountain mist." But when he shone his flashlight ahead, the beam barely cut through the swirling gray. Each step they took seemed to stretch the path longer. No birds chirped, no insects buzzed. Only the soft crunch of their boots echoed through the silence. The usual night sounds of the forest were absent, as if the fog had swallowed not just the trail but everything alive. "It feels wrong," Kelly said softly, but her words barely reached their ears. Laura's heart pounded louder in her chest with every step. The light on Ben's flashlight flickered, making the fog seem to twist and pulse like something alive. The silence felt heavy, as though the forest itself held its breath. Waiting, Kelly stumbled, her ankle twisting on a hidden root. She yelped, and Jake rushed to her side. "We need to find camp soon," he said. Laura checked her phone, but there was no signal. Ben frowned at the compass, tapping it as the needle spun wildly. "That's not supposed to happen," he muttered. The fog pressed closer, making it hard to breathe. A distant sound echoed through the trees, a low, mournful wail that made their blood run cold. Kelly tried to stand, wincing in pain. "I can keep going," she said, but her voice wavered. The wail came again, closer this time, sending shivers down their spines. Jake pulled her up gently. "Lean on me," he said. Ben's grip tightened on the compass, frustration flashing in his eyes. "We can't be lost. Not here," he said, as if saying it would make it true. But the fog was indifferent to their fear. "Did you hear that?" Kelly's voice quivered. Jake nodded, his jaw tight. "We keep moving." The path narrowed, twisting deeper into the woods. Strange shapes shifted in the fog. Branches or something else? Laura clutched Ben's arm, her heart pounding. The wailing grew louder, like a cry for help. "Someone's out there," she whispered. But when they called out, no one answered. They walked faster, their footsteps hurried and uneven. Every shadow seemed to stretch toward them. Laura felt a chill run down her spine as something brushed against her arm. "We need to find shelter," Jake said, his voice sharper now. Each turn in the path felt the same, as if they were walking in circles. The fog grew colder, making their skin prickle. Whatever was making that noise, it was following them, and it was getting closer. The trees grew twisted and gnarled, their limbs reaching like skeletal hands. A cold shiver ran down Jake's spine as he noticed carvings on the bark, strange symbols he couldn't understand. "Who did this?" Kelly whispered. Ben shook his head. "Let's just keep moving." But the farther they walked, the thicker the fog became. It clung to their skin, damp and heavy. Something brushed against Laura's leg. When she looked down, nothing was there. Jake traced one of the carvings with his finger, but the wood felt unnaturally cold. "This doesn't make sense," he murmured. The symbols looked old, too deep to be fresh. Ben's breath quickened as he tried to read the map again. "It's useless," he growled. The sound of distant footsteps echoed again, and this time it was unmistakable. Someone, or something, was out there, Without warning, the trail split into 3 paths. None of them were marked on the map. "Which way?" Ben asked, his voice tight. Jake hesitated, then chose the middle path. As they walked, the temperature dropped sharply. Their breath came out, in white puffs. Behind them, twigs snapped. "We're being followed," Laura murmured. Fear gnawed at their nerves. Something unseen crept through the fog, its footsteps just out of sight. Each path looked equally ominous, stretching into the mist, like endless tunnels. "We can't stand here," Jake said, though his confidence wavered. The sound of breathing, heavy and slow, seemed to come from everywhere at once. "Maybe it's another hiker," Kelly suggested, but her voice lacked conviction. Ben led the way, but his steps faltered with every sound behind them. A shadow loomed ahead. It was an old abandoned cabin with rotting wood and boarded windows. "We should keep moving," Jake said, but Kelly shook her head. "I can't go any farther." Desperation hung in the air as they stepped onto the creaking porch. The door was unlocked. Inside, the air was stale and cold. Dust coated the floor. Faded pictures hung crooked on the walls. But there were no signs of life until the door slammed shut behind them. Laura jumped, her heart hammering. "What is this place?" she asked. Jake scanned the room. "We can rest here for a bit," he said, though he didn't believe it. Something about the place felt wrong. As the fog swirled outside the windows, it felt like the forest itself had swallowed them, whole. "What was that?" Laura gasped. Jake tried to open the door, but it wouldn't budge. Ben's flashlight flickered, then died. Something skittered across the floor. Kelly clutched her ankle, whimpering in pain. In the corner, an old rocking chair began to sway, though no one touched it. A chill swept through the room. The mournful wail returned, closer now, circling the cabin like a predator in the dark. Shadows stretched unnaturally long across the floor. Jake pounded on the door, his pulse racing. "We need to get out," he said. A whisper rose from the floorboards, faint but distinct. "Stay." The rocking chair creaked louder, moving faster on. Its own. Whatever was in the cabin did not want them to leave. Jake found a dusty journal on the mantel. The pages were brittle and yellowed. The last entry read, "The fog comes for us. We cannot leave." His blood turned to ice. "We need to get out now," he said. But as they turned, the windows fogged over, with handprints, small, pale handprints. A whisper filled the room, echoing in their ears. "Stay with us." The lights flickered as a cold wind swept through the cabin. The door creaked open, but outside, the fog was thicker than ever. Something moved in the mist, a shadow with hollow eyes. It reached toward them. Jake grabbed Kelly, dragging her to her feet. "Run!" he shouted. They stumbled through the fog, the whispers growing louder. Each step felt heavier, as if the forest itself tried to pull them back. Just as they thought they were free, a voice called softly behind them. "You'll never leave."